get started. Again, thank you for coming. I'd like to introduce Mark Wendling, the consultant that we retained to help us with the form of government study that we had conducted here. And Mark has been helping us through this process and so that we can move along to make proposed changes to our charter. We also have Mike Hinnenkamp, we have Tom Moeller, and of course Mike Burns here, some very experienced village managers and administrators to help with questions and a little bit of guidance. So we'll go ahead and turn this over to Mark to start out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. To give you a little bit of my background, for those of you who may not have met me, I've been in the city management business for 30 years. All three of you, actually. That's a long time. But I started my career at Delhi Township on the west side of Cincinnati. Worked 2.5 years for Independence, Kentucky. Came back to the better side of the river. As the city manager of Silverton, Ohio for 7.5 years. And was in Fairfield for almost 10. So. And well, thanks, Jonathan. Right now, I'm the assistant city director for City of Troy, Ohio, just north of Dayton. So thank you for having me here. I appreciate your time today. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues and let them give just a little bit of background on themselves, if that's okay. We'll start with Mike.
Sure. I'm Mike Burns, and actually my first real job in the public sector was here at the City of St. Bernard. I was here from 78 to 85, going on to what was then, what is now Westchester, then Union Township, for about 4 years, and then I spent 23 years. Oops. Then I spent 23 years with the city of the village of Indian Hill as city manager there. So about a 35-year career. I've been retired almost 10 years now. Be 10 years in January.
Michael.
Mike.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Hinnenkamp. Again, another native of St. Bernard, kind of part of the gig here today. I have been in local government for about 35 years. Currently, I'm the executive director of something called the Ohio Plan, which we work with local governments. We have about 800 members. Prior to that, I spent about 23 years in Springfield Township, and I chased Mike Burns out of Union Westchester Township. Mike had just left, and then I spent about 6 years in Westchester as planning and zoning director and assistant administrator, and then prior to that, some time in Green Township. So all told, about 35, 36 years in local government.
Thanks, Mike. Tom Muller. I been in local government for almost 44 years now. I spent my first stint as the assistant city manager in Mason, Ohio from 1979 until very early 1980, and then I was appointed city manager and spent almost 9 years, well, a little over 9 years as city manager there. And then I've been in Madeira now for almost 34 years, and I will be retiring at the end of this year.
Thank you, gentlemen. Well, we'll jump on in. So this process started, I guess, a little over a year ago. I met with Jonathan. He's been looking at the charter and trying to figure out if there may be some changes that St. Bernard could make that would really bring some efficiency and productivity enhancements to City Hall. So we started this, and let's see here. I want to just kind of go through, one of the things we did initially is I sat down with all of the village staff, some key stakeholders in the community, all the elected officials. And we really want to talk about what is really great about St. Bernard, and then, also what are some of the challenges it is facing. So one of the great things about St. Bernard is it has an excellent geographic location. It's close to a lot of hospitals, universities. It's 10 minutes from downtown Cincinnati. It's not very far from the airport. So it has a really, really accessible location along I-75. Has a really strong commercial industrial base. As you know, you've got companies like Procter & Gamble, and now J.M. Smucker, and St. Bernard Soap Company, all kind of coming out of that Procter & Gamble heritage. you have an independent school system, which I think is something that is really great about St. Bernard. It's been great that you've been able to maintain that over the generations. You also have a really high-quality parochial school system, and I think that is also something that's a real benefit to the community. You have a really well-defined, architecturally significant town, particularly your downtown. When you drive through, it's very clear that it's been well-maintained, it is still viable, and I think it's really hard once you've lost that to build it again. And I think that is something that is really a strong benefit for St. Bernard and its residents. And then I've found that you have a very dedicated and engaged citizenry. And there are pros and cons to that. Sometimes that can be a challenge too, but I think it's much more of a benefit than a challenge, because you've got people who are willing to do things, who are willing to step up and really want what's best for the community. So some of the strengths, this what we call word cloud, and the things that came up repeatedly in my conversations were things like location, the services that the city offers. I think the residents here are really proud of what they receive from the city, and the staff is really proud of what they're able to provide. Also, very close-knit community. That became very evident through all of my conversations. A lot of people have lived here for multiple generations, and I say multiple, I don't mean 2 or 3, I mean 4, 5, 6 generations sometimes, so it's pretty impressive. Some of the challenges, one thing that came up repeatedly was the statutory form. I can kind of speak to that a little bit from my current personal experience. I currently work for the city of Troy, Ohio. It is a statutory form of government, and Troy is very successful, but the statutory form is very, very challenging. We have 5 different appointment authorities in Troy. And I know you have something similar here. We have the Safety Service Director's Office, the Auditor's Office, the Rec Board, the Park Board, and the Law Director's Office. And so most of the time they play well together, but when they don't, that causes a lot of issues within the structure of the community. Professional leadership, and that's something that got cited. I really debated on how this should be presented up here, because I don't think it's that the leadership you have is bad in any way. I think it's more that it's a challenge to have out on a day-to-day basis. Jonathan, Mayor Stuchel, works full-time, so he can't be here every day and can't really hear the staff what their concerns are, or even know exactly what their challenges are every day. So I think having someone here every day would be a real improvement for the community. And then economic development, I think St. Bernard does really well. A lot of that is its geographic location, but I think that if you had someone on staff that's what they did full time, that could be enhanced. So this is the current structure, and I'm not going to go through it. You know what it is for the most part, and you can see it up there, but it is a strong mayor form of government, but you do have the different statutory offices there, and so sometimes that does create some conflict, especially if you have people who don't work well together. So one of the things we looked at were the potential forms of government. Currently, you are a charter community, but you retain the statutory form when you adopted your charter. And that was intentional at the time, and I think at the time it made sense, but I sense that the community may have grown beyond that at this point. There's also mayor council, or strong mayor, as it's probably better known. And I'll get into the details of that form in a few minutes. And then the council manager, which is village manager or municipal manager form of government. So the statutory form, it's a general law form of government, which basically means it can only do what it's specifically outlined to do under the Ohio Revised Code. So everything is governed through the code. It does not have any real home rule powers. There are three principal elected administrators. You've got the mayor, you've got the law director, and you've got the auditor. And I think they work pretty well together for what I've seen in St. Bernard. But as I said before, that can sometimes be a challenge. And it does create, even the best of situations, you have three different people who really don't answer to one another. And so moving the village forward can be a challenge. And then it also provides for a safety service director. That is very similar to an administrator. I think it depends on the community and how they decide they want to promote that position. And then multiple appointment authorities, as I said before, I outlined those earlier. In mayor council, I don't know what happened to number one there. Council can be, it's typically, the mayor is going to be elected directly by the people, and is typically the chief executive officer of the community and the chief elected official. Council being elected at large or from wards, and they're responsible for acting laws, setting policy, approving the budget. They control the purse strings of the community. There's number one. Sorry about that. And back to the mayor, he does prepare the budget and present it to council for approval. And then it may provide for a municipal administrator. Typically in that scenario, the administrator would serve as the chief administrative officer, would oversee the day-to-day operation on behalf of the mayor, and would assist with preparation and presentation of the budget and other policy-related decisions. And then the council manager. Village council possesses all power and authority to set policy. So basically, typically in a council manager form, the mayor will be elected from council, although the mayor can be directed elected as well. I don't know how it is in St. Bernard or Indian Hill.
No, ours is appointed by the council.
Yeah, same with Indian.
Okay. Fairfield, where I worked, the mayor was directly elected.
Right.
In this form, the mayor typically is a ceremonial head of government. Pull that up here. But does have the right to introduce legislation, and depending on how you would format it, would typically be the one who would run council meetings and would vote in the event of a tie. So I always say the mayor, while the mayor is ceremonial, the mayor still has a lot of influence and authority within a council manager form, because he is or she is the most visible person, typically, of all the elected officials. And then a nonpartisan municipal manager is appointed by council, and that individual will serve as the chief executive officer, oversees the day-to-day, is the chief appointment authority for the community, prepares the budget for council's approval. Are there any questions as I go through here from anyone? So the proposal that we've come up with is a hybrid between the mayor council and the council manager forms of government. In what we propose, the mayor would still be directly elected and would retain ultimate appointment authority. The mayor would be the chief executive officer of the village. The safety service director would basically transform or transition into a municipal administrator position. That individual would oversee the day-to-day. That individual would be in charge of the staff, would hire the staff and fire the staff with the approval and consent of the mayor. This individual would be appointed based on merit and professional credentials. So you would have someone who would have a background in local government management, in such areas as human resources, economic development, planning and zoning, those sorts of things. And again, would have the credentials and the power to appoint village staff with the consent of the mayor. And then the elected auditor and treasurer positions would be combined into an appointed professional finance director position. I think this is important in that you will find some city managers with a finance background. That's not typically where most city managers come from. It's not that managers can't have that background, but it is, the job is pretty all-encompassing. And most city managers will have an expertise in one or two areas, but not in all. So this really gives you someone who has a background in finance. I don't think for St. Bernard that this would have to be a full-time position. I think it could be part-time. I've seen other communities of about St. Bernard's size have part-time finance directors and do that very, very successfully. And then the elected law director, the proposal would be to transition to an appointed law director. This individual would be someone who has expertise in municipal law. Depending on how large their practice is, you might have additional availability for things like labor law, real estate law, workers' comp issues. So it could potentially give you a lot more
Expertise.
expertise. Thank you. Thank you, Tom. So this would be what the proposed structure would look like. You would have the mayor, municipal administrator, the village council, and the law director would be kind of floating between those three: the village council, the municipal administrator, and the mayor. Under the proposal, the municipal administrator would appoint the law director with the approval and consent of the mayor. And I think it was council as well. Like, I'm not certain of that. I can't remember. I haven't looked at it in a while, Jonathan. And then you see the departments down below would report directly up to the municipal administrator. So you would be looking in a transition, a statutory model to a charter model. You do it, as I said before, St. Bernard does have a charter currently, but it doesn't really function like a charter municipality. So this would enable St. Bernard to really take advantage of all the home rule powers that it is afforded under the charter form. The Director of Public Safety and Service would transition to a municipal administrator. I think that this is somewhat in place already, but I think this would make it a formal transition. The Auditor and Treasurer would be combined into a Finance Director position. And then, as I said before, the elected law director would transition to an appointed law director. In the next steps, we're gathering input today via the public forum. And I think there are other ways to gather input, and I think the village has been working on this. You can do it through social media. I know that they've been promoting it via the village website and the public forums, as we're doing today, and the village newsletter. I think once you decide which way you want to go, you need to finalize the charter language and get that on the ballot. I think, Jonathan, you're looking at the May election, is that correct? So I think it probably has to happen by late January. And then place the charter amendments on the May 2023 ballot. That's the conclusion of my presentation. Happy to entertain any questions. These gentlemen are all here. They are highly respected colleagues and know probably more than I do, actually.
This,
Well,
hey, Mark,
Yes,
Mark
sir.
and Mike, this appears to be pretty similar to Springdale's model, is it not?
It's very,
think so,
very
yeah.
similar to
Okay,
Springdale's.
okay. Well, as I saw how it was structured, it appeared to be very similar to the city of Springdale's.
Mark, the only
Yes, Steve?
thing I see that's not listed in the proposed structure, and I believe this is Jonathan's feeling too, that we were gonna keep a president of council. because
That is
Jonathan-
correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Just wanted to
Mhm.
clarify that, because
Yes.
I don't blame Jonathan, we should have wanted one of these.
Are you currently the
Yeah,
president
Steve
of
is
council?
the,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, no, Steve, you would have to have that, because if the mayor is still the CEO, you would still need somebody to preside over council in that regard.
Dale's mayor runs their meetings, and I don't know what his particular role, how he's structured.
That's a little,
Runs their
yeah,
meetings.
that's a little different. Evendale's is a little different structure. He's CEO, but also it presides over the council.
city manager. I feel like the administrator route, like you talked about, is kind of where we're at. We appoint somebody as a service director that's kind of oversees everything. And me as a council person, I'd like to get away from that and get somebody more stable that's gonna be here through transition period. If the mayor comes in, then the mayor can bring in a different administrator, correct?
No.
Under the language as we drafted it, it would require a vote of council to fire the municipal administrator. The mayor would not be able to do it solely on his own accord. And that was to provide that continuity.
That stability.
From administration to administration. So it is a hybrid. Under the pure mayor-council form, the strong mayor, the mayor can hire and fire pretty much all staff at will, depending on whether they're union or not, obviously, or civil service, but the professional staff can be fired or hired at will. So this does provide, it is a bit of a hybrid. It is not the pure council manager form, though. It is somewhere in between.
The council would have a role in the hiring process.
Yes.
Of the individual, would have input, same thing if there was ever.
Understood it as an appointment up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mark,
And-
just to,
And that's something, yeah,
and maybe one clarification, Ray, is sometimes when, different entities use different titles. And sometimes just because somebody's called city administrator or city manager, doesn't necessarily, oftentimes it does, but that doesn't necessarily relate to what their authority is. That can vary from community by community according to their charter.
Yeah, according to the
So
rules.
in other words, I spent almost all of my career in township government. In 22 years in Springfield Township, my title was Township Administrator. However, my Board of Trustees essentially adopted the council manager form. So I had almost all the authority of, as any city manager would. So it can be on a case-by-case basis, and you really got to look as to what the charter says. St. Bernard has taken the biggest step because you already have adopted it. You're already a charter form. As Mark said, it's a little unusual that you adopted a charter, but then you kept the statutory structure, and most of your charter basically retained the language in the statute. But in order to make the change now, it's essentially the same process, but you don't have to go through the charter process. Now you just tweak it. And that can be modified from year to year depending on what you want. But as Mark said, it's a bit of a hybrid, but you're probably more like Cincinnati. I know that's a big government, but it's essentially what Cincinnati has. We just helped Deer Park, the city of Deer Park just adopted a charter a year and a half, 2 years ago. They did something pretty similar to this. They have a city manager form, but the mayor is directly elected.
Well, I think if you use Springdale again as the example,
That's a
in
good
terms
one
of
as well.
continuity of a manager, Cecil Osborne was the city manager, or city administrator of Springdale for close to 35 years.
I was going to say 33.
Yeah.
Yeah, 33 years.
And so you can see that he went through not a whole lot of mayors in Springdale because they had one mayor for a long
For a
time
long
too.
time.
But he did go through multiple mayors stayed in that
Yeah,
position.
Doyle's still there.
No, I appreciate that feedback. I totally misunderstood, and I had thought that the administrator reported to the mayor brought that person on board. And it's not an indictment on Jonathan at all.
Sure.
I'm just, too many times in our past, party mentality got in the way of
Yes.
progress sometimes.
Sure.
Sure.
You know, I don't want to complete overall based on an election.
And this is good, because we're going to do another public forum. These are things I might be able to add to the presentation that, getting these questions help me know where there might be some things that need further clarification for everyone.
One thing,
Thanks, Ray.
in starting and going through this process, one thing that's been difficult, we was able to make as many changes as possibly could in City Hall without opening the charter, which we did. Consolidated, the safety director and the service director wasn't needed to have two individuals.
Right.
But those appointments, again, political appointments, basically, again, depending on who comes in as mayor, you've got a disruption to service because you've got a new person that's appointed. Same thing with the tax administrator. There's no required skill set. So basically, the point being is that we need to reach outside to provide continuity and consistency, which we don't have.
Well, and that's also, John, that's also true with your finance office as well. I mean, the fact that it could change with every election, you really need to have continuity in your finance office and how to handle all of those very important functions.
And that's what we're hoping to do, is to make sure that there's not going to be a disruption to service to the citizens and the employees. And it always happens.
Sure.
The ones that suffer, whether they realize it or not. But we also need a different talent base to draw from instead of just within. We're finally realizing that we have to go outside. St. Bernard cannot produce all of the individuals to staff City Hall. And,
Sure.
we're in a good position, and we're actually at a point where we're moving forward, where there is actually a greater demand and need for someone with particular skill sets that really just doesn't exist.
Mhm. Yeah, that's very good.
Yes, sir.
On the proposed hybrid form of government, is the mayor a part-time job or full-time?
Mayor would be part-time.
Let's go part-time.
It's- And I'm not gonna speak for Jonathan, but I think you're semi-part-time now, but it probably takes more time than sometimes you really wanted to.
Part-time day with full-time
What a bargain.
$2 an hour.
Yeah, if that.
I'll admit that, St. Bernard is partially run out of Mount Washington during the day. So-
It happens.
I've called you about Washington, I know, so yeah. Other questions from anyone?
Attaboy, Steve.
Well, if you have questions, if you think of something, you can always call Jonathan, and if it's something that he needs, he can always reach out to me or any of these gentlemen for further clarification. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I just know that I saw, the village newspaper and the other forms that you had down there, I don't know. what it
Website.
Was, yes.
Yeah.
So currently or after this meeting, that's your way that you want people to have some input?
So we were gonna, so as far as having input, hopefully we can, again, promote the next meeting and try to get more people, but
Sure.
ultimately, we also wanted to put out a survey that would come after
Mhm.
these two events. We have a volunteer that's willing to help, organize that. So the goal would be to gather, some additional information from individuals that cannot make it. And hopefully, again, this being recorded and can be viewed, at other times, it'll help encourage some individuals to speak up if they can't attend, but maybe at least get some input.
Absolutely. My only point is, I think you reach a very small amount of residents through council meetings. Not everybody's watching those meetings, and
Sure.
there's, it's through one particular, one issue, people that want to hear, that's the word, computer, but anyway, the broader we can get, the more people we can reach, I think would be a great idea, so.
And also, John brought up another really good point, is being able to draw from a wider pool of candidates than just might be within your community. That's getting harder and harder in this profession now. And I mean, I just use, and Mike and I were just through a search process, and finding people that want to do these jobs that are qualified is getting even more difficult. So being able to widen the net as far as where you're drawing from is really important. As I said, so I mean, I still teach at the University of Cincinnati in the public administration program, trying to recruit people into city government, and even coming out of those programs, it's been very difficult. So as I said, it's something that that would certainly, I think, help the community and its professional development and its professional operations.
When we get to the point where we're looking for to be able to make that hire and be able to maybe utilize individuals like yourselves to help us in some of the search process, but, it would be nice to potentially look at the idea of at least initially, instead of saying a brand new person to the field, maybe somebody that we could go in and say, all right, because this is so new, and the organizational structure of City Hall and the operations, or whether or not, you know, our goal could be to maybe look at a seasoned person that maybe is looking for a, you know, their last hurrah, but to be able to come in and use their experience to help with, you know, strategizing and getting everything in place and how we're going to operate and leave it a well-oiled machine maybe for the next person.
For the next person to come in,
Which
sure.
maybe could be a newer, younger, you know, administrator that may not have had that kind of experience in the past.
And those, yeah, that's a great plan, John, because as I said, you know, something like that could very easily be done, I would think, because there are a lot of young people out there that are assistants that are potentially looking to become city managers / city administrators. So it's not inconceivable that you would have that pool out there.
I'll tell you, I went to Silverton mid-career, and it was probably, for me, the most fundamental job that I've had. It was a small community that had limited resources, but it had some resources. Had a council that was very innovative and willing to follow the lead of a manager, and really wanted to see change in their community, which I sense here. And so I think you could get someone who is that kind of mid-career, who has some experience. So it wouldn't be their first rodeo, but someone who could really be a real game changer for St. Bernard and really help to take the community where it wants to go.
Yeah, we just recently, in my capacity with the Ohio Plan, we did the search for Silverton's new village manager, and currently doing the search for Delhi Township. And exactly what you're saying, Jonathan and Tom and Mark, that's generally what I'm seeing in the candidates, is you tend to have kind of a pool of rising stars, folks that are they're ready for that next opportunity, and those are good, viable candidates. But then you sort of have that seasoned veteran that is maybe looking for a unique opportunity for that last 5 to 7, 8 years of their career. And that's kind of where most of the candidates are sort of gravitating from.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, the gentleman that was hired to replace me is only 37 years old, but he has about 12 years of experience with 2 other entities. And so, you know, this is a rising star, so to speak. So it's not his first rodeo, but he's jumping into a position that'll have a lot more responsibility than he currently has.
Well, and I would say St. Bernard's, we all know this. Everybody in this room knows, because we've got a lot of background in St. Bernard. And Mark, you probably feel like an honorary native now.
I do.
As well you should.
But
you haven't been through the hazing yet, though.
I have not.
You haven't been through the hazing.
It's a very unique community, and certainly less unique than it was 30 years ago, just because of the way the world's changed and industries changed and so forth. But, for years, St. Bernard had more money. The individuals that were involved in St. Bernard were well-intended, but they didn't have to be an expert. They didn't have to be efficiency experts. They didn't have to understand everything about, the operations of local government. Their intentions were they did a phenomenal job, but the money was no object. So it was sort of easy in some ways. Not necessarily the case, except if you compare St. Bernard to other similarly sized villages, you're still very prosperous.
It's still a very prosperous community.
I say that because it's, as Mark identified, the attributes that you have in the community, you still have incredible resources. It's going to be attractive for somebody. This isn't a sinking ship, so to speak. It's something where somebody can still come in and do some really good work and do some pretty cool things with your economic development. There's still opportunities because of location and, as we said, proximity. So.
To build off of that, there's another community, I won't name it, you'll figure it out. It's right along 75, great geographic location, but it is a sinking ship. It eats up managers and spits them out. By all rights, it should be very successful, but, that's the difference. You guys have you have a really strong community base to build off of. You've got a really strong economic base. When I look what I was able to accomplish in Silverton with an annual budget of about $3.5 million, and I look what you've got here, I think there's so much potential, and I think, to Mike's point, it would be so attractive to someone to be able to come here because they have a lot of resources to work with.
Yeah, that's very true.
We're so unique, and, for a roughly $14.5 million budget, basically what people forget is that what's on the other side of the milk crate.
Mhm.
It provides the majority of our income. And that's what we just brought on alloy development, so, of course, the renamed group for
ACDC, yeah.
But for us, it was a concern having somebody representing us on economic development in the interim, or if not, potentially in conjunction with or in partner with, whomever would come on board down the road as a professional hire. But, we were missing out on opportunities, and we did previously have, our CBO was also, at the same time, supposed to be our economic development director, and we still never really got out there. I mean, we were really still, even at that time, even when we had someone somewhat serving that capacity, we were missing many opportunities to be, represented, at the table in Hamilton County. And, bringing on Alloy, I think, was probably the first step, because one of our issues is that, the majority of the communication, it would be with our industrial partners, would come from our tax administrator. That's not really.
No.
So with Alloy, one of the focuses, again, will be retention. We were also we just approved a resolution, supporting a 75% abatement over a 10-year period of time on a $70+ million project with one of our local industrial partners. And so, being able to work with them to, obviously, they're making that kind of investment, and knowing that they're going to stay, and we were competing with other, foreign locations. I mean, that's big, but again, no one can see where it is, because it doesn't really, from a geographical standpoint, nobody sees it, nobody drives by it, but yet it's a huge impact for us down the road. I mean, we could not survive if it was not for our industrial base.
Oh, no. I mean, and that's one of the things that the community, at all possible times, communicates that to its residents, is how important that is. Because a lot of communities don't have that. Matter of fact, most communities don't have that base that St. Bernard does.
So they have a single.
Or they have, or the single source. Right.
Yep.
You're blessed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I use St. Bernard in my urban economic studies for this class that I teach, and show, what per capita spending is done for the various entities around. And St. Bernard is right at the top as far as how much you spend per capita for services. And it's only outweighed by Blue Ash. It's the only community that spends more per capita at this point than St. Bernard. That means is that you've got a wealth of opportunity in that situation.
We are the center of the universe.
Yes, you are. Absolutely. I'm not sure how I escaped, Steve.
You're here tonight, aren't you?
I'm here. There you go. Good point.
We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your call.
No, happy to be here. Happy to be here. It's good. It's always good to come back.
Yeah, just a quick question, Jonathan. Is there opposition that you're hearing, or any organized opposition?
There's always people that are going to be against change.
Everyone, always is a little on edge just when you start talking about change.
It's
but,
different, yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't say opposition. I think, there's concern, but I also think that there is feedback to the point where, it's overdue. I mean, this is something that we probably should have explored some time ago, but I mean, I don't think people are as uncomfortable about change as they once were. I don't. I mean,
Yep.
I try to do as much as I can to change things on a regular basis in Tuscaloosa, but I don't think that people are really on edge now. I think there's also been enough of a turnover. I mean, St. Bernard still is a multi-generational community, but there's also a huge influx
Of new people.
young professionals.
New people,
coming
right.
here.
Sure.
First generation St. Bernardians, and it's so that nice blend of the seasoned individuals and the new blood, I think is really great for the village itself.
Yeah.
And now if we could just get some of the new blood to get involved.
Mhm.
You know,
It's tough.
And to help take the place of, you know, and give opportunity. You know, I mean, it's, we're fortunate though to have the people that we do. I mean, it's a strong community, but I think people are at a point where they want more.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking even, Mark, the reason, part of why I bring it up is sometimes in a presentation where I knew we were gonna have, you know, oftentimes those who are in favor don't show up to meetings, right? So oftentimes when you have an issue, it's those that are opposed that show up many times for the first time when there's a public policy issue. And sometimes maybe just gear, if you do have that in your next meeting, unfortunately I won't be able to make that, but you gear some of what do you expect to hear as the concerns, and you address those before they, you know, as part of the presentation, is some of the
Yeah.
advantages.
Are both parties generally
Obviously,
in
we're
favor
all-
of this?
Well, just so you know, there's one party.
Okay,
Next.
okay.
There's independence.
It's
I
really-
think I can answer a little Mr. Hennigan's question, not necessarily opposing, but just exactly as Jonathan, who happens to be a friend as well as the mayor. I work for the service department. I am not speaking on behalf of the service department. I'm speaking as a resident, but also as a service department employee. Concern is opening the charter, because Barb Siegel, many years ago, had the foresight that if we dropped below 5,000 and became a village, we would continue functioning as a city.
Mhm.
Again, you've mentioned we have all these resources that we should be able to operate very well, and we have. And I think some of the guys, me being one of them, in the past, I actually did get laid off at one point because of a previous administration long ago. But that's always a concern. If we open up the charter, are we still gonna have our civil service protection in the
Gotcha.
service department?
Yep.
Is he gonna be able to just say, oh, those guys are overpaid, and whatever? It was pleasant for me to see Mark's presentation, that services was in bold print up there, because most of the guys that work down there in the service department take pride in that clean curb line and everything else every day.
Sure.
So,
No
yeah, that's,
question.
as a concerned citizen, that's one of my things is, if you look at other municipalities, big ones that hire a city manager or whatever you would like to call it, and they come in, one of the first things they do is start cutting services or,
Well, that's not true.
well, I mean, that's what we see.
Yeah, but that's, what you see is not really true. That's not reality. I mean, it's that, and you would still, you would still have civil service protections. I understand.
I think it's a legitimate concern, and that doesn't surprise me. As I came down here, that's one that I thought, and I think that has changed in St. Bernard to a degree where not all of your employees are probably St. Bernard residents or lifelongers.
Right.
Probably still some, but that's beginning to change.
That's gonna be a change, yeah.
I think when Mark and I said, that's a hard thing to break when most of your employees live in St. Bernard, they're related, so all of your residents have a connection to an employee, and if you're trying to make efficient decisions, and again, in the past, there was plenty of money to go around, so, you know, that will be a tough nut, but I don't think, you're not gonna have to make cuts, is my point, with that type of a budget.
This is a partnership, though.
It does.
Well, sure.
Correct. So if the proposed structure it would still be a partnership. It wouldn't be someone just going rogue. I mean, it's not like I don't think it's gonna be as big of a reality check as what people might think. And the whole idea is, again, providing future consistency and continuity that isn't there. I worry, I mean, you know, Tom has done a fine job, but we're at a point where we also need, again, someone that has some additional abilities that it just doesn't exist at this time. I mean, and so the idea is saying, okay, well, you have Tom, and then you have to bring someone else in. The whole idea is to bring someone in with, you know, a multifaceted position that has a skill set that can do a little bit of everything.
Mhm.
And Tom, you know, and as I said, Tom's done a great job, but, you know, he sticks it to his wheelhouse, and that's kind of it. We need someone to be able to reach outside.
Couple points, if I could. First, the civil service protections are enshrined in the charter, and
It's
there's
still there,
no
right.
proposal to change that. So they're there. That is a holdover from city status. A village doesn't have to have civil service, but it is enshrined in your charter,
Right,
so
it's
it
still
is there. And then to build on what Jonathan was saying, you know, I think one of the benefits to having someone who has a background in local government management is to bring a network with them. So it's not just people in St. Bernard that they know. They've got contacts throughout the county, at the county development office. They've got contacts up in Columbus, hopefully, with, you know, they have ways of bringing projects, other expertise to the village that can otherwise be somewhat difficult to procure.
Mark, not to mention colleagues.
Yeah,
They can reach
absolutely.
out to them. They're valuable when you run up against a difficult situation. They have a whole network of, hey, what do you guys do? And then, you know, how do you handle that, Tom? And it's a very tight-knit fraternity.
And just like today,
Yeah.
you all showed up to help me. Same thing.
But it's a legitimate concern. I think for St. Bernard, it just, you know, the right manager will recognize that. You don't have to, he or she will
I have no
understand
issue,
it.
I have no issue with somebody gonna be here for longevity. We work through people that couldn't handle the job or whatever, different positions, and so a continuous, whether it be financial director or auditor, somebody that's not elected every 4 years or whatever, would be fine. I respect that. My main concern was the civil service protection, because when it was explained to me in the past, it's been many years ago, it was all or nothing. If we had let them open the charter, oh my God, the floodgates were gonna become Elmwood.
Yeah, that's not true.
We don't want that.
Nobody's trying to take away anything specifically that was established, you know, by, you know, the forefathers and mothers that did this. I mean, there's a lot of thought that went into the process. This is a tweaking of that to, I think, allow us to better adapt as things go on.
My concern was answered, and I appreciate it. As you can see, all these concerned citizens. Communication is just, it's so difficult. I mean, no matter what department you work in, whether you're on council, especially the mayor, he did a call command. It was very short notice. I don't know if he did one pass. Call command is only one avenue. There's Facebook and the village website or whatever, but obviously, people just don't pay attention, which reminds me, Jonathan, you do a call command mortgage this week, right? Thanksgiving. So half the residents.
It's not that unique, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, that's
It's
not.
only the same
yeah.
No, it's not.
But no, I appreciate you answering my question. You did completely answer it, so good.
Good.
Thanks, guys, appreciate it.
Right, thank you.
Thank
No,
you.
no, said-
Yeah.
no.
Glad to help.
St. Bernard is the cradle of city administrators, just like Miami's the cradle of coaches.
Very true.
Are you family from the dairy?
Oh, yeah.